breakout candidates, obviously, like value, there's certain ways that you can describe it that people may agree or disagree with you on. And I think for each one of these breakout candidates, we're going to have different flavors. Okay. There's different reasonings for why these dudes are on our lists. I remember my first year, I was a Pro Bowler. I was an alternate. I had a lot of mistakes. I didn't know what was going on, but by the grace of God, the right guys were injured or didn't have good years, and I got into the Pro Bowl. So in a lot of people's eyes, my breakout year was my first year. That's not the case. My second year is where I went and turned it into an all-pro season. And I will always think of the second year as the year where things clicked, as it were. For a lot of these guys on the list, you're going to say, well, they've had success. This guy was an all-rookie. No. There will come a time when these people's talent really comes to fruition. You're no longer just scraping the surface. Okay. Anything else you want to preface this thing with, Ryan?
No, I like that you added that part because I saw your list and I said, hey, one of these guys we're going to talk about played really well as a rookie. And your point is that he can play a little bit better because I remember talking about him, but I won't give too much away. Yeah, let's do this. Let's go.
Okay. So the first guy I'm going to start with is somebody that I fell in love with when I was watching him in college. Throws a beautiful football, and he's a guy like myself who's dealt with injuries over the course of his career. But when he's healthy, his offensive style is prolific. His ability to throw the football down the field and be a leader for his team, it stands out. That's Michael Penix Jr. And Michael Penix Jr. got an opportunity to break out, in my opinion, last year when he went up to Washington and played the Commanders in primetime. And it was one of the most fun games that I've watched, context included, because Jaden Daniels had taken the world by storm, and he had already broken out. So he ain't making this list, okay? No. He's on his own list. Michael Penix Jr. went up there and went tit for tat with Jaden Daniels. He's going to have an opportunity to do that, obviously, more often this year, being the quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons. But I think he does have a great year. He's got a lot of talent, obviously. Bijan Robinson, Drake London. Kyle Pitts is in a contract year, so we're going to figure out what the hell's going on with him. Darnell Mooney was a steal from the Bears, and last year he had some really prolific catches and explosive plays. So Michael Penix Jr. is a guy who is poised to break out this year.
I love that. And the funny thing when we talk about Michael Penix Jr., Kyle, is that going back to his draft year, and that was, just 12 months ago, because he came out with Bo Nix, who blew up, and you mentioned Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams and Drake Maye. And for some reason throughout that draft process, people were down on Michael Penix Jr., and I just never understood why. I remember talking to media folks, thought he wasn't a first-round pick. I think he ended up being my QB4. I was like, I'm not buying into this. One of the few things I've learned as I've covered the draft for 6 or 7 years is that nobody knows what they're doing. Like, we're just sort of finding our way aimlessly in the dark to find the light switch. Exactly, throwing darts. And to your point, Michael Penix Jr. played a lot of football in college. He can absolutely sling it. He went from sort of athlete to pocket passer because of those injuries that you talked about. And if you want a little further insight into what that Washington game looked like, he talked to our buddy B-Mac when they went to – where did they go to? Waffle House in Atlanta. And he talked specifically about some of the plays that he made, including a touchdown pass to Kyle Pitts late in that game on fourth down, I believe. I'm with you 100%. And I think Zach Robinson going into year 2 as the OC, all the players around him, the Raheem Morris sort of mindset that they're bringing to that organization, I'd be hard-pressed to envision a situation where everyone's healthy and that he doesn't have success.
All right, who you got?
I'm going to go with the guy that was drafted 3rd overall in that draft class last year, Drake Maye. And again, throwing darts, I thought Drake Maye would have sat for a year based on how he played at UNC because he was all over the place. A lot of that had to do with that offensive line not being very good, and he lacked skill position players outside of Marion Hampton and Tez Walker. But he showed me, and now they have a new old OC in Josh McDaniels. So part of it has to do with Drake Maye. Part of it has to do with Mike Vrabel coming in, and part of it, maybe a large part of it, has to do with Josh McDaniels and his success with young quarterbacks. And, you sort of learn this as you hang around the league long enough. There are guys that are made to be coordinators, and there are guys that are made to be head coaches. Josh McDaniels isn't supposed to be a head coach. That's just his fate. That's okay. He has crushed it as an offensive coordinator. Say the same thing with my guy Dick LeBeau, who coached BMAC. He was not a great great head coach. He's a Hall of Famer as a defense.
I hated playing against Dick LeBeau teams.
Yeah, there you go. Now, when he coached the Bengals, they were terrible, and that could be for any number of reasons. But as a DC, he was as good as they come.
Sorry, Dick LeBeau defenses, I would say, not teams.
Right.
The Dick LeBeau defenses were a nightmare.
And I would imagine that has a lot to do with just the sort of the fire zone blitz thing that he helped develop?
Yeah, there's so many things you have to keep your eyes up for when playing against that defense. It's not just in front of you. It could be coming externally, cross dog with a corner, just nuts, Captain Insano type stuff.
But in terms of Drake Maye, I think physically we know what he can do. Mentally, we know what he can do because this is a talking point during the draft process. His family, he comes from a family full of winners, people who have played at a high level and had success, including his brother who won a national title with UNC in basketball. And then you add in what Josh McDaniels is going to bring and the success he's had. I find it hard to, again, envision a situation where he's not successful. Now, he doesn't have the playmakers that Michael Penix Jr. does, but few people do. But one of the things I keep coming back to, just looking at this roster based on what they've done so far, Kyle, is that I think this team could win 8+ games. Like I'm buying into Drake Maye and Mike Frabel to that extent.
Yeah, I mean, I have been obsessed with Mike Vrabel since the first time I saw him catch a pass wearing a linebacker football number when I was in like junior high, middle school. That's a football guy. And then he becomes a coach. And I'm dear friends with Will Compton, Taylor Lewan. They rave about Mike Vrabel. And one thing you're going to get from players more often than not, particularly when they're talking about guys they played with or for, is you're going to get the truth. And I know who Mike Vrabel is based on who I know and what they've been through with him. I can't wait to watch the turnaround in New England. And I think having that competitive, tough spirit on the defensive side of the ball and that, importation of talent this offseason will make Drake Maye's competitive juices flow even more because you know what? He's not doing it all for naught. He's going to be out there playing for wins this year. It's going to be a lot of fun. We got the New England Patriots regular season win total up here. I think I'm definitely going to go over 7.5 wins for the Patriots.
I'm with you. Hey, let me ask you this. You mentioned Mike Vrabel, and I don't want to name names, but as a player, subconsciously or otherwise, do you have more respect for playing for someone like Mike Vrabel, who is imposing physically, who has a track record of playing, as opposed to, just to throw a name out there, of a smaller guy like a Brandon Staley, for example, who didn't have that background but is incredibly smart and knows X's and O's?
Well, look, it's a great question. And I would say this to people that come from that kind of Brandon Staley tree. You better be coming with an X-Men power. If it ain't going to be, I used to do this at a high level. And one thing that I give Brandon Staley credit for is he always took the time to be a great communicator with players, not only within his position group. He was the outside linebacker coach in Chicago. So he had Khalil Mack, Leonard Floyd. He was tasked with trying to get that top 5 pick, dialed up, ratcheted up for Vic Fangio's defense. But he always spent time with the offensive lineman and talked about what he was looking at. He's a big-time tennis player, tennis background. Okay. So if you can have – so he found a way to equate it to returning serves or, having the advantage and taking the whatever the hell he's talking about. His communication was great. So if you're not going to be a Vrabel guy that puts his hands on you and makes you feel him every day, physically, emotionally, then you better have something from a cerebral standpoint that stands out. So we both like Drake Maye. Obviously, the guy that I think is going to be just fine in Minnesota is J.J. McCarthy. And he came off the meniscus in training camp. And I think if you're going to get hurt, obviously you want to get hurt at the beginning of the season. Give yourself as much time to get into the next year. He's been wildly efficient by all accounts in Minnesota. The guys seem to like him. Obviously, Sam Darnold had so much success last year. There were some ups and downs, but more often than not, the Vikings offense was humming. And it was a combination of scheme and skill, obviously with Justin Jefferson and the plethora of guys you can get the football to in Minnesota, coupled with Kevin O'Connell. A lot of quarterbacks are primed for success if they're in the driver's seat of that Ferrari. And I think J.J. McCarthy showed us in college he has the ability to play at a high level. And I think it's a plug-and-play situation. I think he becomes one of these young names that steps up to the plate this year for the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, I didn't love J.J. McCarthy first go-round in terms of his tape in 2023, the 2023 his last season in Michigan. And then I went back and watched all his 3rd and 6+ yard conversions. And he was first or second best in college football in terms of converting on 3rd and mid to long. And he did it with a assortment of plays that you have to make at the NFL level. And then we talked to him at the combine, and I went from lukewarm to loving him. There's no one more charismatic. And I was listening to Sean McVay and Les Snead talk about just players after their draft and how they approach it. And a lot of what they talked about is player over, like person over player. Like you have to be a good fit. And I'll ask you again, how important is it to have a quarterback, especially a young quarterback, be charismatic and be a leader and not be sort of maybe not aloof, but timid in terms of the responsibility that they now face as a 23-year-old having to command a 53-man roster, basically.
Well, you said person over player, and my God, that is just like so powerful because the NFL, the game of football, is a people business. It's a people sport. And if you don't got good dudes to your right and your left, you don't want to go to fight for them. You don't want to go to bat for them every day. And I've played for quarterbacks that were incredible people. And, you know, I think about Marcus Mariota when I first got to Oregon, and I got to watch the impact that such a good soul, such a good heart can have, not only in the weight room, on the conditioning field, on third down. You're alluding to JJ McCarthy having success in the money downs. That riz, that charisma, it matters, dude. And then you get people that are kind of flat and may not essentially connect with guys in the locker room. And you can see how people are a little less committed to excellence when it comes to that. You know, I played with Mahomes as well, and Mahomes was as approachable a superstar, as communicative a quarterback with all positions, both sides of the ball, and that stuff matters.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. That's huge, and you see it. And I've heard you talk about this on Push the Pile in the past, like especially like when December rolls around and you're got 4 or 5 wins and people looking over their shoulders about job security. And you sort of check out mentally and you're already in, you know, the Bahamas.
Yeah.
Having that glue sort of helps.
Yeah. And I mean, it keeps the lights on, as it were. I think about Cincinnati, and even though they were in the doldrums last year, people were like, well, if they win the next 4, and I mean, you know, you're never out of it when you've got a guy like Joe Burrow, and that's the reality of our league.